Good morning, guys. Uh, Today we're going to continue what we talked about last time on the 3Ds. We're going to go to the second round on how to fight back and get paid. Excuse my voice a little bit. So I've been talking a lot the last few days, and I guess it shows, but a little strain in my voice. But anyway, we want to continue on the most important part of your commercial drying aspect, which is getting paid for the job. Because you can do all the commercial drying jobs that you want to do, but if you don't get paid for them, then it's not going to do you a whole lot of good to get out and do the job. In fact, it could be your worst nightmare. So let's look at that and let's talk about different ways of getting paid. All of your large loss all of your large loss jobs these days are going to involve third party consultants. Used to be you would draw one every now and then and get one, but these days every single large loss job that you have will have a third party consultant on it. And saying large loss, I would say anything in the $100,000 range or above. They're even using third party consultants on a lot of jobs that are a lot smaller in times when the adjusters are busy. Insurance companies have dwindled way down on the amount of adjusters that they have in house. And the only way for them to compensate that is to use third party consultants to come in and do a lot of the legwork that they used to do for them. So go back to some of the rules we've already talked about. If they have a consultant, you're going to need a consultant. Two consultants just work better with each other than it will if you try to talk to a consultant. The consultant can be on his job for the second day and he still thinks that he has a superior role to what you do because he's the hired consultant. So when you put a consultant with him, things just seem to go a lot better. If they have an engineer looking at stuff, you'll need to have an engineer as well. You know from past jobs that you can have two engineers and get two different opinions. You can have two hygienists and get two different opinions. So we need to let these professionals work it out among themselves, and we need to keep doing our job, which is managing our business while they work this out. If they have a lawyer, then you would need a lawyer too. Don't ever try to go up against a lawyer. It's going to be very seldom that an insurance company deals with a lawyer because of the expense involved. So usually on that bullet point, the only time that they're going to get a lawyer is if you get a lawyer yourself. So when you're dealing with third-party consultants, you'll need to keep some of this stuff in mind. I know we briefly spoke about daily rate schedules before. Let's dig into that a little deeper and talk about why daily rate schedules are so important, and so important for you to have those correct, and then so important for you to go by your daily rate schedule once you get into the process of doing your invoicing. And remember, on a mitigation job, if you're billing after the fact, you're not doing an estimate, you're doing an invoice. The only time you should prepare an estimate would be on something like rebuild, to where you're estimating what that cost would be, and you're going to get an agreement before you start the work. That would be an estimate. Other than that, you're doing an invoice. Daily rate schedules are important because you've got to be able to give the customer a price for what you're doing. Now, unless you want to take 2 or 3 days and figure up an exact dollar amount price and give them that, which you don't have time to do, and you would blow your customer's mind in a lot of cases at the same time. So unless you can do that, you're going to need to give them some way of being able to figure out pricing. The only way we found it works is to give a daily rate schedule. So you need to talk about the different rates for labor, the different rates for equipment, the different rates for equipment, and different rates for expenses. So you sort of got 4 categories that you need to go by there. Each one of those categories will have several things that you would need to talk about on it. Labor, for example, what is a general labor? Now, one of the consultant's favorite thing to do is to try to count everybody you have working for you or with you or on your behalf as a general labor. And they do that because the general labor rate is simply cheaper than the skilled labor rate or supervisor rate or the electrician rate. I found out to make this category easier, if you can stay away from common terminology that Xactimate or a consultant would use, such as drying technician. Unless you've got, what is a drying technician? What do they do? So if that's a moisture mapper, you need to have moisture mapper on there. If you have somebody doing electrical work, they need to be classified as an electrician or an experienced electrician. In this example here, electrician is a tradesman specializing in electrical wiring of buildings, stationary machines, and related equipment. They balance electrical loads during heavy demand. So they're not necessarily a licensed electrician, because we're not going in and going to wire your building, and we don't have to have a license to do what we do, but we do have to have a great understanding of electrical to be able to do that when we're doing a commercial building. Supervisors, what is a supervisor's duty? What is the skilled labor, demo labor duties? We've got skilled labor on this one. We've sort of started changing that to say experienced labor. The word skilled is bringing up a lot of red flags. Well, what's their skill set? What's their certification? You know, let's face it, there's a lot of trades in life you do without a certification, but you have a skill set, or you have experience in that given trade. So we need to talk about that. And when you do your daily rate schedule, try to make it more reflect what you're doing. So even though this one says skilled labor, again, we've started reclassifying some of those to experienced labor. We try to stay away from general labors. We do have a few on each project to carry out building debris. If we're doing demo, we will carry out other items that may sweep and mop the floor in non-essential areas. They may clean the bathroom areas for the workers. So it's good to have a few general labor there, but you don't want a general labor doing demo work. They'll cut their hand or arm off with a saw. They won't cut lines straight. They won't cut them properly. They simply don't have the skill set to know what they're doing. Electrical assistant, somebody that helps the electrician. Commercial moisture mapper, someone who creates moisture points and accurately records moisture content levels on a structure. They do it on a computer program. And they're also responsible for giving directions to the project manager where he needs to focus his drying efforts on. Now, you don't need to make that into a water damage technician that gets $30 an hour, okay? Because this person has a bigger skill set than that. They're actually directing the job site as to where you will be directing your drying efforts for the next day and the next day and the next day. So don't let those two get mixed up. Desk and setup monitoring technicians. as somebody that's familiar with the operation of deskants, or familiar with how to set not only the deskant up but the ductwork. They're familiar with how to make changes in the deskant settings to make them perform optimal like they should, and to do minor repairs throughout the process. Generator technician, somebody that's got to understand more about a generator than how to cut it on and off. They need to understand the dangers of dealing with high voltage. They need to understand the consequences if they let a generator run out of fuel, and how much damage that does to not only the generator but to deskants or air movers or dehumidifiers or whatever you're running off of that generator. When the generator runs out of fuel, it starts to surge, and the power amps and volts both go from the very lowest of low to the highest of high when the generator's trying to recuperate. And it'll sit there and do that for 2 or 3 minutes. So you've got a piece of equipment running on so many volts or amps, and all of a sudden it's surging all over the place, and that just destroys equipment. So you've got to have somebody there that knows how to operate generators, and that they know that, and they take care of that as they go. Project managers work closely with the upper management to make sure that they're directing the field laborers on what to do. It's a whole different task than just a supervisor. You will have some supervisors, but their job is to direct anywhere from 6 to 10 people, crews, and to keep those crews on task and to record what they're doing. Senior project manager would be the person looking over most of the job on site, and they would be obviously above the project manager. You need a project accountant. Sometimes in the industry they're referred to as a clerk of the works. You may need an administrator that puts the files and records all that together. One of the consultants' favorite things that they like to do is to say, oh no, all that kind of work is included in your overhead and profit, or in your overhead. You shouldn't be charging us extra. That's just producing your invoice. Nothing can be further from the truth. That has nothing to do with that. Your overhead covers the secretary at the office that answers the phone and that pays payroll and does tasks like that as it does to run the day-to-day operations of the business. This person we're talking about here, their designation for these days that you're working on these jobs are to put together the field work and the communications about the billing and the paperwork that the insurance companies are requesting, or even go as far as to say are requiring before they will pay you. So don't let them get away with the thought that this person can simply be somebody that should be in their overhead category. It's usually a good time to remind them that they had said earlier that they don't want to pay overhead and profit on mitigation, but now they're telling you that this should be part of your overhead. So watch that. But even if they agree to pay overhead, this isn't an overhead expense. Bill Giannone may key more on that. He's the guru when it comes to expenses and accounting and stuff like that. But in no way does your people that's sitting there all day, every day doing this paperwork for the insurance company, it's their requirement for them to pay the property owner. That's not an overhead expense. Don't fall in that trap. Senior consultants or project coordinators. If you have a larger project and you need a coordinator, that coordinator will coordinate between all the subcontractors, all the equipment suppliers, all the material suppliers, all of the rental companies, and all of the people they have on site. And his job is to coordinate the efforts in a manner that you won't have delays in the job. You don't have one party waiting on the other party to get through. You don't have someone waiting to get equipment when they need to do the next task, that you've got to have that there exactly when you need it. So that's still another person that you would need as far as getting somebody on the team that's running the project for you. Senior consultants, again, if they have a consultant, you need to get a consultant to work with that consultant, or maybe a junior consultant. A lot of times, a junior consultant works with the senior consultant that you hire, but the junior consultant's doing the legwork. They're on the ground. They're staying on the job site. They're looking at the project daily and reporting that back to the senior consultant for his analysis and his instructions. So, clerical assistance is someone just that's going to be able to come in and enter all the data that needs to be entered that the insurance company requires before they will refund the client, their client, for the mitigation bill that you've turned in, or the contents bill, or if you're doing time and material, that would also apply on the rebuild bill. I would recommend that you don't do rebuild until at a minimum you have an agreed scope on the rebuild. It's better to also have an agreed price on the rebuild, and also it's better to make sure they've paid for the mitigation and their other responsibilities before you jump headfirst into the rebuild. But at the very least, have an agreed scope on the rebuild so you know what you're doing. And if you're doing time and material, then the prices will fall where they fall within reason. Hotel and per diem, make sure you got that defined clearly in your contract if you're traveling, or even if you're 40 minutes across town. But if you're working the labor staff, your demo people, your cleaning people, if it's on a fire job, if you have a large number of those and you're working 12 hours, and maybe even a lot of the times you'll be working 12 hours, 2 shifts, your upper level people don't have time to go home. It's not time to be able to go home and relax. They don't have time to drive there, let alone go there and sleep. So you need to put them in a hotel close by, so if something happens in the middle of the night, they're 3 minutes away, not 33 minutes away, that they can get back there quickly. So you're going to have some hotel expense a lot of times, even if it's a local job. You may have airfare for bringing different consultants in, different people in, or if you're working a job out of town. Needs to be some pretty good communication. If you're going to send your people home, every other week or something, and there's going to be airfare there, on what is the most economical way to be able to do that. And then one of the last things on this is saying certified payroll. If somebody requests that you give them certified payroll, that's an expense that you're going to incur having someone to do that. So charge for each person for that certified payroll for each week that you have to provide that. The next line under that's very small, but still needs to be written. Overtime applies when 40 hours is reached per employee each week on the job, or as state laws require. Now, a lot of companies will charge 40 hours after 5 o'clock in the afternoon for any day shift. Will be overtime. Saturday and Sunday would be overtime. That's always a huge uphill fight if you've got a crew that's working there and you've assigned them to second shift, of why they're receiving overtime. We have analyzed several large projects, and we found out it don't make very much difference whatsoever if you're doing the 40-hour week on that job, or if you're doing anything after 5 and on Saturdays and weekends. Because when you're working 12-hour days, these people reach overtime rates so quick that it just don't matter. So it may not be a fight you want to fight. I'm going to defer to Bill on some of that and let him answer that. But it just may not be a fight worth fighting. But decide which way you're going to do it and do it that way. So double time on holidays. That's usually on federally recognized holidays that you would charge double time. A lot of times they'll say, "Well, if we're paying double time, we don't want people to work." And sometimes that requires some instructions to the people or some good communication. They just don't realize how much it costs to stop a project for a day in the middle of the project. They think they're saving money. They're not paying double time. Well, chances are they're already paying time and a half. So you're talking about a good bit more money with the other half in there. But to stop that project and gear back up after being out for one day is just a nightmare that's going to cost a lot more money, particularly if you're out of town and you got to get people home. You still got to have people in hotels. You're still going to pay people per diem if they stay in town. So a lot of those expenses keep going, even though it's a holiday and they say don't work that day. A lot of times they'll come back and say, "Well, you can work that day. We're just not going to pay double time. We'll pay time and a half if they're on overtime, but we're not going to pay double time." And you have to look at it from a business decision and see how you want to handle that and sort of kind of go from there. But that is one of the cards in their deck that they will pull out on you quite often. The last line on this daily rate schedule on labor says 10% overhead and 10% profit will be added to all above prices. That starts a argument, fight, or pushback, if you will. It's probably the correct terminology every single time. But you're not making a very good decision if you don't put that in there and just give it up on the front end. I mean, these consultants get paid by the hour, and they're like everybody else in the world. They like to make money. That's why they're in business. So the more they can argue with you, the more hours they're going to put in. The myth that they want to look at the job and close it real quick is simply a myth. That is not true. You could take $100,000 job and bill them $50,000 for it, and they're not going to look at that file in 30 minutes and say, "This file looks good, we recommend you pay it." I've never had it happen, no matter what the price is. So it is a myth that they want to get through with it quickly. They're going to go through it methodically. They're going to cross the T's and dot the I's. They're going to find some things that they disagree with you, that they have to consult back and forth, because they make money consulting back and forth. And then last but not least, just as you want to look good to your client by going out and actually getting a building dry and saving businesses on lost time and lost revenue from being down so long, you want to do it quickly. That's your underlying goal besides making money. Well, their underlying goal is if they can save the insurance company a substantial amount of money more than they're charging the insurance company, then the perception of their net worth goes way up. So anybody that tells you they don't operate that way is simply not being honest. It's just simple business economics. Now, on the overhead and profit issue, there's two ways to go about that, and I've heard people discuss it and debate it both ways. And I won't say I'm on the fence on it. I'll say either way works. About 50% of the people say, "I'm charging overhead and profit. I have a business and I deserve overhead and profit. And I'm sticking to it and they're going to pay it." That's one way of looking at it. And I shouldn't say there's two ways. There's really three ways. Then there's another set that said, "Well, I'm going to put overhead and profit on it and I'm going to demand they pay it, but that'll be my bartering chip. That gives me 20% leadway to barter back and forth to be able to negotiate and not give up, things that are really important." So there's a certain amount of people who do that. Then there's a certain amount of people just look at each and every line item and increase it by their overhead and profit numbers. Now, if that's 10 and 10, that's great. If it's 8 and 15, if it's 4 and 2, whatever your overhead and profit number for your business is, that you may want to increase the line item on that and say, well, I'm not going to put any overhead and profit on the bottom line. I'm just going to increase my numbers. So some people like to do it that way. So you've got to make the business decision on figuring out which way is best for you. Again, on these kind of things, when you're setting pricing and you're determining how you're going to bill for that, I'm going to defer to back to Bill and let you talk with him on how to do that. My goal in this conversation and the one we had in the last 3Ds presentation, round one, is to tell you the tricks of the trade that the consultants and adjusters use, or to tell you what to expect when you get into negotiation. Here's what you're going to get, here's what you're going to expect, and it's the same all day, every day. So, how important is it that the client initials every page of your contract and rate schedule? Now think about that for a minute. When these things get a little dicey at the end, and they never hardly get dicey in the middle, they only get dicey in the end when it's time to write the check. And I've had it said plenty of times, well, that wasn't in the contract. Well, I don't know what happened. Your pages must have stuck together, but I didn't get that page. Just or I didn't read that page. Just take all that doubt out. But you need either a signature or an initial on every single page. Everybody that's in business is used to doing that. Nobody's offended by it. They just say, hey, we've got a 2-page work agreement here. We've got 2 pages of materials, rate schedules here. We got a page of labor rate schedules, and we got a page of equipment rate schedules, and we just need an initial on every one of them. Nobody ever bucks at that. More and more, they're reading it and asking some questions, which is a good thing. And in the best contracts, you will have them ask you to change some stuff. And the best way to do that is just ask them, say, okay, I understand what you're saying. And I probably can get by with that. Just draw a single line through the sentence that you're not liking and initial it and send it back, and we'll look at it. And if we agree with it, we'll initial it. A marked up contract is the best contract that you can have. Why? Because it proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that they read the contract and that they understand it. They can't mark something out of a contract they didn't read because they didn't know it was there to mark out. So they know it's there. So don't say, oh, okay, I'll retype that and rechange it and send you another one. No, you want them to mark something out. If they've got a little something that they'd like to change on it, it makes the contract a lot more valid when you get into asking questions. The goal of a contract is not to win an argument in court or in an arbitration. And let me say that the proof's in the pudding. I've been in business 43 years now. I've been in the courtroom on business-related issues besides expert testimony for other companies. I've been in the courtroom one time in 43 years. And we do, 200 to 600 jobs a year, depending on hurricanes and stuff, where we're having clients. And let that sink in. I've been to court once. So the goal in having your contract and your documentation correct, and excuse my French, but I'm going to tell you exactly like my lawyer tells me. He said, you want the other side to have the oh shit syndrome. In other words, when they look at your file and you've got all your paperwork together, your contract's legit, it's for lack of better words, mostly ironclad, and they look at it and the first thought they have is, oh shit, there's no way we could win a battle against this. Then they're just up to trying to confuse people. If a lawyer cannot prove his case, he wants to confuse the jury, so to speak. And then they're up to negotiations. Delay, deny, defend. So We want you to have these things so ironclad and so wrapped up good for everybody concerned, both your client and yourself, that there's no issue with it, that they just go ahead and pay the bill and you don't have to go to court. But as soon as you get the big head because you've done 100 jobs and you hadn't had to go to court and all this paperwork isn't necessary and I'm going to stop doing all this crazy paperwork, then you'll wind up getting in trouble again. And you'll repeat the process over and over. It's what we call insanity, doing the same thing and repeating a different and expecting a different outcome every time. But get this paperwork down. When it works, keep on doing it and keep on doing it. Every time you crawl an airplane, the pilot goes to a rigorous checklist of everything on that airplane, and it works. But just because you hadn't crashed a plane in his 35-year career don't mean that he starts taking shortcuts and not go through the checklist. You need to be the same way. You need a checklist for everything you do on the project, all your paperwork on the project, and make sure you got it right, and then you won't have a crash when it comes to collecting your money on it. Change orders are vitally important. If it's not in your original scope of work with your original agreement, you need a change order. There's a couple of ways to do change orders. There's a provision in the contract we use that says we can do them by email. And we will, toss emails back and forth. And as long as people agree to it, or we may say, we've got to do this. If we don't hear from you in 48 hours, we'll proceed as outlined. And that works 98% of the time. However, you've heard me say before, you must know the rules of the game you're playing. So you got to know the rules of your state. For example, in Ohio, if you're working for a public entity, you cannot do that. You have to have a signed, dated change order with an agreement to change the price for each and every item that you do that is not on your original work authorization and scope of work. And it don't matter if you're just adding to it. I had 100 air movers on there. We found 15 extra rooms wet. We're going to have to put 140 on there instead of 100. If you don't get a change order for those extra 40 and to work in that extra area of the building, then you may not get paid for that if they push that fact. And it don't matter if their consultant agrees to it. The laws in the state of Ohio say that you've got to have a written change order for it. So know your laws in your state and know what you need to do when it comes to change orders. Completion certificates are one of the most important documents you can have when it comes to getting paid down the road. It is very hard for somebody 6 months after the job is completed to say you didn't do a good job when they signed a completion certificate at the end of the job stating that you did do a good job. Steve DeBuren, I'll try that name again. Steve DeBuren teaches a class called Strategies for Success. And one of the things I remember best out of that class that Steve taught, and I took it 30 years ago, I still remember it, is he said, the last thing you need to do on a job site every day, no matter how big or small, is ask your client, is there anything else I can do for you today? Is everything going good? Are you happy? And when they say yes, and you do that every day, it's hard to have a client that's not satisfied with you at the end of the job. It's just really hard to do if you ask that question every day. And if they do have some concerns, get those taken care of. Most of your clients are happy when you get through with the job and you leave. The unhappy part comes when the insurance company or the consultants or the adjusters start threatening not to pay your bill because you're a crook. You charge too much. You made $500,000 in 14 days because you're a crook, and we've got to stop them from being a crook. And when they beat that into the insured's head for 2 or 3 weeks and threaten that they're not going to pay the bill and they're going to have to eat it, then all of a sudden the job you did wasn't that good anymore. People get scared that they're not going to get their bill paid and that they're going to have to pay you. So completion certificates are very important. We've talked about some other things in previous presentations. I'm sure they're in the library. You go back and look at them. But, being creative in your estimates and writing your estimates in a way that's favorable to the insurance company for your estimates for rebuild that has not been created and your invoices for mitigation that has already been done. So look at that. So when it comes game time and it's time for you to get out there doing, you have a lot of armchair quarterbacks. And those armchair quarterbacks have a lot of cheerleaders out there and a lot of people helping them. And they're holding the phone up and they're sitting in their chair and they're ready to play ball. But you've already done the work. Where were they on Christmas Eve night or on Friday or Saturday when you got to the job? I mean, they didn't show up for 3 or 4 days. Then they sent the wrong person. They sent an adjuster that couldn't handle the magnitude of the loss, and they have to send another one out. And so about 7 days into the process, maybe somebody shows up and you're almost through with the mitigation, but they want to tell you how you shoulda, coulda, woulda done the job. And you're already through with most of the mitigation on it. You'll have consultants that work for the same consulting company. We want your estimate and Xactimate. And most of us are aware of the fact that Xactimate don't work very well for large loss projects. It don't have a lot of the large loss stuff in it. But they will still ask for that. Some of them will say, no, I want it in time and material. And what they're really thinking in the back of their heads, wait, we need it from whichever one's cheaper. Just do both and let's see what's cheaper. And then they wake up in the middle of the night and they say, oh, wait a minute. Let's do this. Let's do it both ways. And let's cherry pick the cheap stuff or the stuff more advantageous to the insurance company out of Xactimate, and then take what's more advantageous at a time of material and put that on there. So we'll take what's advantageous on both of them and put it together and make a hybrid estimate. I was on a phone call last week with a consultant that did that exact thing. We're talking about the mitigation portion, and they're talking about how high the price was. They wanted equipment. We're going to talk about this in a little bit on a monthly or weekly rate. And they had already referred to Xactimate a couple of times as when it came to the labor source. And I said, well, you've mentioned Xactimate, and Xactimate don't have a weekly or monthly rate. Well, yeah, but Xactimate don't work on commercial projects. And I said, well, I understand that, but we can all agree it's still sort of kind of a good rule of thumb or a guideline to go by. No, Xactimate just don't work on commercial project. Now, keep in mind we're talking about mitigation. 15 minutes later in the conversation, we're talking about the rebuild. And they said, well, the insurance consultant said, well, we wrote the estimate in Xactimate, and the one you wrote is way too high. And I called him out on it. I said, you just said Xactimate didn't work for commercial jobs, that it was way off base when we were talking about it, in the mitigation. He said, well, that's apples and oranges. It works sometime and it don't sometime. And he really didn't have an answer. But what he's trying to say, he's trying to cherry pick from both of the two. So be ready for that. My recommendation is always do it in time and material. And then once you get finished with it in time and material, if they're just jumping up demanding it being in Xactimate, send it off to somebody to convert it over to Xactimate and stick that on their bill. But you keep with your time and material one. So what I was getting into about cherry picking between the time and material and Xactimate or T&M Pro. Both of those are estimating softwares that are pretty widely used in our industry. Now, you have to abide by the pricing on your contractual agreement. Okay, you don't say I'm going to bill by Xactimate pricing because your client is not going to know what Xactimate is, and so they're not going to have any kind of reasonable expectation of what this is going to cost. You can't say I'm going to provide a bill using 10M Pro pricing because once again they don't know what that would be. So you have to have your own pricing guideline back to the daily rate schedule that we talked about, and watch the tricks that are played a lot of times with the consultants trying to cherry pick between the 2 or 3 different ways of doing it. 3-day drying. We've all heard the myth that you should be able to dry any and every single project you ever walk onto it in 3 days. And if you can't, you don't know what you're doing. Well, I would call BS on the myth, because when you walk into a job that's got 70 or 80 hotel rooms, it takes almost 3 days to figure out which ones are wet and which ones are not. Then you got 5/8 sheetrock to deal with. In firewalls, you may have 2 layers of 5/8 sheetrock to deal with. You may have lightweight concrete to dry. So both in a residential and commercial setting, 3-day drying works when things all fall into place, but a lot of times it don't. However, the reason I bring it up here is not to talk about whether or not we dry it in 3 days. It's to warn you that the consultants and the adjusters are going to pull this on you a lot of the times and say, well, I'm not paying for 5 days. You should have had it done in 3 days. And you need to make sure you've got your paperwork ready to be able to answer that question should you choose to negotiate with them. Now, I have said before, and I'll say it again and again, all your communication goes through the person who signs your contract. It goes to them and from them. And if they ask you to include a consultant or adjuster in on the communication, by all means, you can copy them with their permission if they've asked you to do it. But don't get into the back and forth negotiating or sword fighting with an adjuster consultant. It's simply not your place. And in some states, if you're not a public adjuster or an attorney, it's also illegal. But at the end of the day, you don't want to do it. You got to deal with your customer, and you can copy anybody you want to. But watch out for the card they're going to throw at you about 3-day drying, and be prepared for that. Labor classifications, we talked about a little bit earlier. They're always going to want you to classify down to general labor. And what is a general labor? A general labor is somebody with absolute no skill set. They're a general labor. You would hire them off of a day labor sheet. You would hire them off of Craigslist. You might drive your pickup truck through the parking lot at Home Depot and 15 or 20 jump into the back of the truck to go, work for day labor and get paid at the end of the day. That is a good understanding of what a general laborer would be. There's not many room for many of those on these large commercial projects that we do. I mean, do you really want to be doing an open business or a business that has contents and furniture in it with people that are just walking in off the street and doing day labor? Most of the time, you're going to want either skilled labor or minimal experienced labor. You're going to want somebody that's used to working in demolition. We know how to use a chalk line. We know how to cut a straight line. We know how to keep dust from blowing all over the building. We know how to pull the nails when we get through removing the sheetrock and clean our mess up and make this thing look like a professional job so it's ready to be put back together. Now, do you need a few general laborers depending on how many people you're working? There's nothing wrong with those guys carrying out the debris that other people are tearing up. There's nothing wrong with those guys sweeping floors and doing a few things with that, but you need to make sure that they're just not rent-a-drunks that came in off the street and just got out of prison the day before. They need to be properly vetted so you know who you're using on that. Another trick that the adjusters will play on you is about getting overtime on salaried employees. They'll come in and say, well, we don't allow that. Well, why not? Salaried employee makes, they may work longer. But if you know that's going to be something they're going to pull out, and I'm going to tell you they will. So watch who you're putting in, how many hours your salaried people are putting in. Watch how you run the job. First place, if you've got a person that's on the job site and they're doing physical labor, they probably are not salaried. But just be aware that they're going to throw that curveball at you. Now, they will pay the hours for that person. Let's say you're paying a salaried employee $25 an hour and they work, 50 hours. They will pay them the $25 an hour for 50 hours. The part they fuss about is the time and a half for the extra 10 that they don't want to pay that on salaried people. I had, for the first time in 43 years, on Wednesday, a consultant say, well, we'll need a letter from your HR department certifying that these 4 people are actual hourly employees and not salaried employees, and that they're an employee of the company and not hired from a day labor group. Your contract needs to have some language in there about how you charge for people that you bring in from another source, a skilled labor group, maybe a demolition company, maybe this and that. And like I said, they try to do the switcheroo on you. They'll tell you they're not going to pay overhead and profit, but then they say, oh, well, you hired 1-800-DEMO to come out and do your demo. We want you to give us their bill and we'll pay you overhead and profit on top of that. Wait a minute, I thought you weren't going to pay overhead and profit. Oh, well, we'll pay overhead and profit on that if it's your demo bill. But you said you weren't going to pay overhead and profit. So they cherry pick what they want to do. So have language in your contract that identifies how you're going to charge if you call a construction company to come in and do the demo for you. You hire an experienced labor crew to come in and do demo. Or even if you hire day labor, are you going to charge them what's on your rate sheet as a general labor, as a demolition labor, as a skilled labor? Or are you going to turn their bill in and add 10 and 10 to it? So be careful and be aware that that's one thing they will do on that. So. And again, they'll come in and they don't want to pay overhead and profit. They will deny that. But then at the same time, they'll come in and say, wait, we'll pay it on rental equipment. So let's say you rent air movers and DUs or deskants from a different company, and they come in and all of a sudden they don't want you to charge those air movers at $30 a day like's on your price list and like they're accustomed to paying in Xactimate or whatever. They don't want you to charge those dehumidifiers at $100 a day. They want to see what you paid the rental company, and then they want to put overhead and profit on it. Why? So they can save money. Now, you're still just as responsible for that equipment as if you owned it. If a piece of that equipment malfunctions and damages the building, if a piece of that equipment comes up missing, you've got to pay for it. You're still just as responsible. But I'm just telling you the games that they'll play on trying to cherry pick some of that. And again, with the armchair quarterback and the shoulda, coulda, woulda, they will run you to death that, well, you should have done the job this way. Well, you could have done it this way and saved a lot of money. And if you would have, it would have saved money and it would have saved time. And at the same time, they never were even on the job while you were doing it. So know that they're going to play that game a little bit. So the adjuster come in, and you'll have some of them that come in and they'll be like, I'm in charge today. And, I'm not going to pay this. I'm not going to allow this. I actually had a very large adjusting firm tape the scope of work on the door of hotel rooms that we're working on in a job. They taped the scope of work on every door. And so they were effectively becoming the general contractor on the job by doing that. They're scoping the job based on what they wanted to pay for. So it's the first time and the only time I've had that happen. And after that job was complete, that company won't ever do it again because they're there to consult about what's a fair price for the job, not dictate the scope of the job and how you do it. But if you find somebody in that, just start having a good conversation with him, ask him how he wants to do stuff, and write that down, and he'll back up a little bit pretty quick in most cases and let you run the job like you're supposed to. You're a professional restorer. He's a professional accountant. Those are the difference. He's trying to save pennies on a job that you've already done, and you're trying to restore a building. They will tell you really quick if something goes wrong and a job grows mold that, well, you're the professional. I'm not here to dictate how you do the job, but then they'll turn around and tape the scope of work on the door, so don't fall into that trap. Again, because we don't allow that, a consultant can't allow or deny anything. They're there to consult and give advice to the insurance adjuster. Do they have a lot of weight with that adjuster? Of course they do, because a lot of adjusters are simply gonna rely on and go by what that consultant says. But when you hear one say that we don't allow that, it's you've got a good one on your hands for this project. So adjusters and consultants are can be difficult to deal with. If you will get into your paperwork, get into your contract, your CDC that we talked about earlier, your communication, documentation, and contracts, and make sure those are good. And you need to know the games that we've talked about today that the consultants will play. And they're running out of tricks because there's only so many tricks in their bag of tricks on how to try to get you down. And if you know the rules of the game, you can win the game each and every time. Are you going to lower your bill from 100% of the dollar rate? Some of the time, chances are you are. Sometimes there's just a mistake in the billing. And if there is, own up to that and go on. Sometimes there's an item that's just not worth arguing about. We spent 7 people on a conference call last week talking about a $63 item. And we spent 15 minutes on it. A $63 item. You had 7 professionals on the Zoom meeting talking about a $63 item. Now, I don't mean an item that was $63 and we used it 100 times. I just mean $63. So know when to pick your fights and know when it's worth it or not. I do know some companies that say my bill's my bill, I want 100% of it, and we'll go to the mat if I don't get it. That's their way of doing business. So you've got to determine once you get your contracts, your documentation, your communication in line, you've got to determine exactly your best method of doing that. And I would say a lot of jobs, every job's different in some respects. So I hope you enjoyed what we said today. I apologize about the voice. I hope it's clear enough you can understand it. If it's not, you've got my phone number here on this last slide. And on behalf of Crest Network, thank you for listening, and call if you need anything.